Hey, it's interesting times, isn't it? A lot going on in the world, and a lot going on for many of us as we navigate the world as it is right now. And one of the things I've been thinking about a lot in recent times is in this kind of disruptive moment, what does it mean? I've bumped into these conversations with people, really wrestling with this question of what does it mean to say God is present, that God might be acting in the world. Is God at work in the world? And if God is, what does that look like? What role does prayer play in all of that? How do we think about this as people who are trying to walk out of faith and a spirituality that's shaped by the story of Jesus and so on? What does that actually look like in real terms for us? And I want to talk a little bit about that in this short reflection. This is going to be the first of about three reflections, just circling around this idea. And I want to do so by reflecting on this phrase that Jesus uses in some of the gospel stories. So Mark, for example, recounts this story where Jesus is talking about the kingdom, and he uses this language that the kingdom of God has drawn near. And I find that really interesting language, right? It's language because he's in the midst of a complicated situation himself. His people are being oppressed under a political empire, Rome, that is using violence and force to kind of ensure the ongoing stability and reign and spread of the empire. And so the people of who are living in Israel, Palestine at that time are under the thumb of that empire. And so there's that going on. But there's also a lot of complexity among his own community. There's religious power struggles. That religious belief and practice is being used to kind of control and coerce people. To, in Jesus' kinds of words, to lay upon them burdens that they can't bear, And so a lot of this kind of stuff is going on. There are all sorts of competing visions for how we should respond to this and what we should do, and what they should do about the Romans, what they should do with their religion, what they should do about their land, Lots of big questions for them at that time. And Jesus uses this phrase, that in the midst of all of that, the kingdom of God has drawn near. And it's interesting language, I find. It's language not of control. Jesus doesn't turn up and say, I'm here now, I'm going to fix it all, I'm going to take control and I'll be in charge now. Instead, Jesus uses this language that I think is much more about possibility than it is about control. This doesn't reveal to us a God who is micromanaging everything, who is a puppet master in the sky, or who is kind of moving the pieces around the chessboard, but in fact, this idea that if we are open and receptive and responsive, we might sense that the kingdom of God is always near. But what's our responsiveness to this? This is the language of possibility. And he goes on in Mark's account of the Jesus story to use this this metaphor of a mustard seed. The kingdom of God is like a mustard seed, that it's only small, but it gets planted in the soil, and then it slowly grows, and then it becomes this beautiful tree that gives shade to creatures, and birds perch in its branches, and so on. Right? Again, this is a kind of organic language of possibility and potential. This is the language of the kingdom for Jesus, I think. And this question of kind of possibility is one that I find really interesting as we think about the time in which we are. How does God act in the world? I wonder whether the primary way God acts in the world is by calling us toward more loving possibilities. In each moment, with things the way that they are, what are the loving possibilities before us that the divine wants to call us into? We've invested a lot in control as a society. I speak as a kind of Western European man, and I think we've shaped a world which is in so many ways about like control, mastery over nature, mastery over our own lives. All of these ways to try and control our sense of vulnerability or fragility or uncertainty that kind of maybe is sitting beneath the surface and that we're kind of terrified of, even our mortality, right? And so we struggle as a culture and as a society to deal with any of those questions. Instead, we want control, we want mastery, we want to have power over. And this spreads into our spirituality as well, where our relationship to or with God, perhaps in prayer or whatever it might be, also becomes a means of kind of calming those fears about our fragility through trying to seek control through our spirituality. So maybe that's praying to get God to do some stuff, to change some stuff. And in that way, we're kind of using God to try and make things the way that we want them to be, And this is just not the way, generally speaking, that Jesus talks about his vision of the kingdom. For Jesus, the kingdom of God has drawn near. So are we paying attention, right? And so this language of possibility is really beautiful to me, and I think really relevant to our time. And I want to talk about loving possibilities here. This is the language I'm interested in, because I think this is not just some kind of capitalistic notion of possibility, right? If you believe it, you can do it, or you can do whatever you dream. I'm not talking about that. This is not just like, yes, you can get to the next rung of success on the ladder of prosperity. I'm talking about possibility in terms of being shaped by love. What is possible if we are to respond to the invitation of what love looks like in each moment, both personally and collectively. This is not just an individual question. This is a communal question. This is a question for us, maybe as faith communities, as larger communities, as society. What are the loving possibilities that are before us? And that might be questions not just about me and what I might be able to accomplish or achieve, but those might be questions about what mercy and justice and kindness and empathy look like in the context we find ourselves. And sometimes maybe the loving possibility is to allow ourselves to feel grief or loss that we're navigating. Sometimes it might be to respond and recognize we need more rest. Sometimes it might be that we need to sense what is needed in the lives of those around us. And so the possibilities before us might relate very much to the possibilities for others. For Jesus, this is all shaped by those commandments. Love God and love your neighbor as you love yourself. And some theologians talk about this idea, this kind of invitation that's before us is like stronger than an invitation toward loving possibilities. Some theologians talk about this idea of the divine lure, this idea that we're being called forward into something, and we can choose to sort of do our best to ignore that, or we can respond to that. And we respond, you see human beings responding to that in all sorts of different ways all of the time. And that's like a really beautiful thing in the midst of the chaos and the uncertainty. And so a part of the role, I wonder, of spirituality and faith in this moment is how do we cultivate our attentiveness to that question, rather than kind of giving in to the madness that's in the world right now. We're seeing the kind of the feeding of old classic fears and scapegoating and racism or queerphobia or whatever it might be, to sort of try and figure out who's to blame for our feelings of fragility. And that is not, for me, responding to the loving possibilities. That's instead kind of retreating to our desire for fear and control and all the fears that kind of come with that. And so instead of bending to all of that, how do we sit collectively and personally with this question? What are the loving possibilities before me, given what is happening in this moment? I can't change what's going on around me. Like Jesus didn't suddenly take control of everything. And I can't use God to do that either. But I can say, okay, given what is in this moment, what loving possibilities lie before me that I can respond to? Collectively, how do we cultivate and curate that kind of spirituality? So as I say, there's going to be a couple more reflections to come circling around this idea and a couple of the parables of Jesus that we'll use as a way of exploring that. So let's see where that takes us.